We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome. My name is Ian. This channel is all about music and art. And this is where we talk about music and art. And in this video, I'm going to look back at what's happening regarding music streaming in the UK. And over the last couple of months, the UK government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the way that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that this particular committee would inquire into the impact of streaming on the future of the music industry. The article stated that the inquiry will consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. I knew that some high-profile musicians were giving evidence to this committee, and the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November and another meeting on the 8th of December. Now these meetings were long, lasting over 3 hours each. So what I've done is I've edited them down into shorter videos, and I have put direct links to the questions in the description down below, which will make it easier for you if you want to look at a specific question and not watch the whole thing. It's worth providing a background to the witnesses giving evidence in session 2. We had Garvey, the singer from Elbow, who is also a BBC 6 music presenter, O'Brien Guitarist, songwriter, singer and musician from Radiohead, and Nadine Shah, who is solo singer, songwriter and musician. All of the sessions were chaired by Julian Knight, and the complete list of committee members and the relevant links are in the description down below. Now this recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament Terms and Conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or the audio of the recording in any way. I can't use this material for satire or use it on websites or social media platforms that promote, encourage and facilitate illegal activity and encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 1 of session 2 from the 24th of November 2020 into the economics of music streaming. This is the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and this is our second panel today and our first hearing on the economics of music streaming. We are joined by Garvey, singer and songwriter for the band Elbow and BBC 6 music presenter, O'Brien, guitarist, Radiohead, and Nadine Shah, singer, songwriter and musician. It's still morning, sorry to keep you waiting, but good morning everyone and thank you for joining us. Morning. Thank you. We received an email into the committee, I think it was yesterday, from an artist. I'm going to read you the email and then I just want to sort of gauge your sort of ideas in terms of whether or not this is a regular experience. It was from a Luna Francis. It says, since signing with Island Records in 2012, we have generated over 1 billion streams but only saw a royalty check for the first time in 2019. That's 7 years later. Even then we had to pay that money to the label because they said we still owed them from the touring. My label took a large percentage of everything and owned the masters. Instead of being able to invest the profits in further touring, writing songs or merchandise, we had to give it to the label. Expenditure on projects was in no way discussed, even if we asked. But all the income from streaming was going towards recouping some unknown vast sum of money that essentially meant you won't see a dime for a very long time. The lack of transparency with what you were actually earning from streaming and how your label has spent money can leave you completely in the dark, working for years without seeing any money. Does this experience chime with you? Nadine?
There's so many of this that does, and I think one thing to be said is that whether or not it may or may not surprise you of the little the artists know about the logistics or the intricacies of the nature of these deals. I mean, I for one, listening to the speakers previously to this in the last session, I feel embarrassed almost to admit the little that I do know. But this is an industry a lot of this industry is based on trust. Managers giving contracts to artists managers beginning relationships with artists with no contracts. And there is this idea of, well, trust us. You concentrate on your work, you do what you do, and leave that nitty gritty to us. Don't worry your pretty little head, essentially. And to an extent, yes, we do want to focus on the work that we're making, and that does require a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of our headspace. But a lot of this does baffle us, but a lot of it is alien to us, sadly. So I can relate entirely to what she was saying there, yes.
Hi, Garvey.
I'd say that Nadine's absolutely right. You don't get into music with a view to studying its economics, and managers make themselves available to you, and that's the first kind of minefield you approach as an artist. Elbow are very lucky to meet the manager we still have in Phil Chadwick, but a lot of the time people don't, and a lot of the time people are let down. And I would say that the situation that outfit find themselves in, I think situations are as wide and as varied as the number of contracts out there. I think you get lucky and you get unlucky, but the bias is, as we've been discussing all morning, the general bias is to ultimately not be able to pay your way as a musician is where we find ourselves. That's I think what we've come to discuss.
Actually, then I'll bring Ed in a second as well. But we heard in the first session there were sort of standard industry contracts. Is that not the case, Guy?
Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
In the first session, we were told by our witnesses that there were sort of standard industry contracts out there. So what you've just said there sort of suggests that actually some people get lucky and some people don't. Is that really the case? Is the example I just used there, is that an exception? Have they just got a bad contract, and actually just by having a good manager they would have got a better contract? Is that a fair estimation?
Yes, I'd say that's the case. I think you can steer it better if you have somebody who knows what they're doing. It's not true that great art finds its audience. This is the reason I got involved with these proceedings. I have been new music, be it some time ago when Elbow first started putting records out, and we were lucky enough to meet record labels. Obviously, I mentioned Phil, my manager. We were lucky enough to work with labels that developed us and got us from bedrooms and garages to a Mercury nomination on our first album. The reason that I've come here today, and I think I can speak for Ed and Nadine here as well, is the system as it is threatening the future of music. And that sounds very dramatic, but if musicians can't afford to pay the rent, if they can't afford to live, then we haven't got tomorrow's music in place. I'm here because of what I've been lucky enough to live as a musician for 20 years. And that required the record companies that nurtured us and developed us, and the producers that we went in, and the cathedrals of recording studios we used, and all this assistance and nurturing came from record labels, from management, from publishers. And I want what we had for the next generation of musicians, but it's become so skewed. I mean, streaming in itself, actually, streaming is a bit of a miracle. I was listening to Betty Smith this morning because I was awake at 5 a.m. because I've been really nervous about appearing here. And I realized that I was listening to a recording that she made for me 100 years ago. Now, the fact that you have access to every recording ever made, every piece of music ever recorded in your back pocket for £10 a month is a miracle. Almost. It's almost a miracle. If musicians are equitably paid, then it's a miracle, because then it's sustainable and then it's something for everybody to be proud of. The guilty feeling that came up in the last panel about, can I really get these artists for this little money whenever I want? I have that guilty feeling, but I don't think it's peculiar to people in the music industry. I think anybody who weighs up the effort and the time that goes into making their art and into making these recordings, and not just the art, the craft and the skills of producers and recording engineers and microphone manufacturers, you know, all the different technical staff that surround this industry. You take all of that work into account. No, you shouldn't really have it in your pocket for £10 a month. And if you have got it in your pocket for £10 a month, some of that music better be going to the people who put it in your pocket in the first place. It's really as simple as that. The record labels are business organizations, and businessmen are not very good businessmen if they freely give away their profit margins. So they need a little assistance here. But I think as we enter 100 years of popular music being recorded for us to hear, I think it's something that's really achievable from here. Tom Gray said in the last session, this isn't because of COVID. No, it isn't. But now it's really, really desperate. And as Nadine said in her statement, musicians are having to look at the books. They're having to look at the system, and they're having to say, we need some help here. Let's not let it get as far as lawyers facing each other down. Let's get our heads together around a table and work out how the British music industry can keep being something to be proud of. Let's set a standard for the rest of the world in the way we remunerate our musicians. And I best stop talking for a bit.
Divorce this morning from a popular beat combo, I believe. Ed, could you add to that? Have you heard that sort of email that we received, and then we hear, a guy just sort of saying about how he has, made 20 years living out of music. Do you fear for the generation to come and the sort of pipeline of talent if the economics as they stand right now just stay in place or even get worse?
Yeah, for sure. I think the essence of what we've got is we've got the system that I call the era that I was signed with Radiohead. We were signed in '91, and I call that the analog era. And we've got this analog model that had huge imbalances, unfairness, and you're all being, it's interesting to see your reaction to the testimony this morning. You're becoming aware of the unfairness and the opaqueness within the business, and then you're bolting on this digital model, and it's not working. And I'm an exception to the rule because, I actually feel quite embarrassed being here because I've been able to do this for nearly 30 years or whatever. But it's the young artists. And yesterday, Guy, Nadine and I got together because we were nervous and we wanted to, just get familiar. And Nadine said something really, really, really striking to me that sort of echoed the last 24 hours. And so Nadine's Nadine's an extraordinary artist who gets played a lot. She's a really important artist. If you listen to Six Music, she's one of the pillars of Six Music like I do. And so she's a successful artist. She's not like on a Radiohead level or whatever, but she's really doing amazing work. And she said yesterday, I struggle to financially support myself. And that's crazy. I mean, there've always been imbalances in the system and they need to be addressed, but it's more acute now.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming forward this morning. We've heard a lot about some of the negative aspects of the streaming services and the platforms. But what is your opinion on those streaming services as a whole? Do you think they've had a positive or negative impact on the whole of the music industry? Ed, yeah, come on in.
Yeah, I think they've had a really positive impact on the industry. When I started getting involved with artists' rights and sticking my head above the parapet, which was about 12, 13 years ago, and we founded this organization called the Featured Artists Coalition back then, and it was about providing a voice for the artists. And the biggest issue that we were dealing with then was illegal file sharing. It was off the scale. So, for instance, kids were going to college and they weren't, they didn't have CDs, they were past CDs, they were illegal file sharing through Napster, through LimeWire. You could get the entire catalogs for free. And the whole argument with the industry, as Colin said, the previous thing, the revenues went right down, and the whole argument was like, how do we deal with this? And some people thought, well, we should illegally prosecute file sharers. I always thought that was absolutely nonsense, because if I was an 18-year-old and I had the chance to download everything for free, of course I'd do that. I love music. Of course I'm going to do that. So what's been brilliant about streaming is that it's shifted. It's the norm of behavior has shifted. And I think, Spotify tends to get a bad rap amongst musicians stuff, because overall they tend to pay less. But I think there's a reason for that, because of the way that they fund it, the way that it's paid. They have this freemium level, and I believe that's a really important thing, because you introduce streaming in that way, and it takes people away from file sharing. And so I think, and in terms of the last 5 years, we can see it within the industry. There's during the end of the noughties and the beginning of this decade, it was down in the doldrums. But now there's more optimism. There's definitely more money coming into it. Greater budgets do greater creative endeavors. It just needs some parity and fairness in the system. And artists, as you're kind of gathering, are not really profiting, or many artists, from the spoils of this.
Well, Guy, I'll bring you in now, but that actually brings me on to my next question. So you mentioned that artists aren't getting a fair, equitable treatment in this, but do you think the other parties involved are? So the streaming platforms themselves, the record companies, the publishers, are they taking a fair proportion of the revenue?
Are they taking a fair proportion? No, yeah. That's why we're here. No, I don't think they are. I think it's as I say, business organisations are supposed to be good at business, and this is why there needs to be some kind of an intervention. It has to be recognised that music isn't such a great job that you can do it on nothing. It's like everybody does it on nothing in the first place, and then when you finally get over the look sideways that you get from your friends and your family when you tell them that you want to be a musician, you finally get over that and you get some recognition. Back home, that still wasn't an income for quite some time. I think for the first 3 years that Elbow were signed to a major record label, we were still on £300 a month, something like that, and we couldn't believe it. The reason I've got involved is because it's got harder since then. What streaming represents, what it could be, if we do this right, is a niche musician who might only have an audience of 40,000 worldwide can earn a living from that. Not just earn a living from it, but have enough money to go into a studio for 6 months to explore and deepen and further their art and make better music. And then their audience grows because the music is better, which is not the way that some music is made. Streaming has benefited from an awful lot of music, it has to be said. Where I'm sat now in the Dairy in Brixton, most of the other musicians that come through the door look at me agog when I say that Elbow spent 2 years over an album, because they're in for a day. They've written it in their bedroom. They come in and do vocals, and then it's mixed remotely, and they put them out as and when they write them. And for pop music and grime and for hip hop, it's a totally brilliant model, and it completely works for them. But that shouldn't be the only kind of music in consideration here. The lovely thing that could happen is that everybody finds their audience, and that it's as wide and broad and beautiful as music is, it's supported as such, and it gives people, Nadine has got first-hand experience of this. Her contemporaries are people who have dropped by the wayside on account of the way that economics are shifting.
Yeah. Okay. And then how much transparency is there when it comes to deals between sort of recording labels, publishers, collecting societies and streaming services? Do you guys get to see that as artists yourselves, or do you feel it's quite transparent?
Okay, no, I don't feel that it is that transparent. I don't. The things that I do know, I can be asked many questions about the intricacies of, what I earn and how many streams and this and this. All I do know is that the earnings from my streaming, they're not significant enough to keep the wolf away from the door. I'm in a position as an artist with a substantial profile, a substantial fan base, and it is critically acclaimed, but I don't make enough money from streaming. I'm in a position now where I'm struggling to pay my rent, and I'm embarrassed to talk about these issues publicly. I'm embarrassed to talk about them for many reasons, because money, it's sometimes, to an extent, is an indication of success. But here, that's not really the case with me, because I am a successful musician, but I'm just not being paid fairly for the work that I make. Transparency, like I said, like I first said in this session, often we are encouraged, artists, we are encouraged not to ask these questions here and there. I don't think there is enough transparency, no. But the bottom line for me is that what is transparent is that I'm not being paid. And this is the same for my fellow musicians. And so many other musicians all over the world are in the same position as me, where they are struggling. They are struggling. We can't afford to be musicians. And that's a wild concept, to not being able to afford to be a musician. So then we're in this really stark, bitter, awful reality where the reality is that we could lose lots of musicians, lots of great music. And like was said in the earlier session, what Tom was saying, this country is known for producing some of the finest musicians of all time. And we best protect them and make sure that continues.
Yeah, it would be absolutely devastating. Guy, you wanted to come in.
I'd argue we've already lost an awful lot of music. We can't put this down to what we're talking about today. The piracy that Ed was talking to and referencing, there's no two ways about it. Streaming has saved us from piracy, but it's not paying in such a way that that's making a difference to musicians starting out. And the niche musicians as well that Nadine's talking about, you've got to remind yourself that some of the oldest and the biggest names weren't pop stars when they appeared. I don't have to list them. You used to have a look at anything over 20 years old in your music collection. In terms of transparency, and I'm referring to notes that I've got from a manager, so I'm swatting up here, Nadine. I'm not claiming to have this knowledge. But he says that Polydor accounts was every 6 months they show clear and accurate income streams. We have a great relationship with our record label. I feel I should say that. Yeah. And also he says that Spotify and Apple have management apps which show real-time streaming figures and historical data which can be referenced with the label info. So he's happy with that element of
right. Okay. And so you're happy with your record label and your manager, but do you feel like you're represented fairly when it comes to these negotiations directly with the streaming services? And if not, what would you recommend in order to make that case, or how would you overcome that challenge?
I think this needs to come from all parties. I think when I saw what Tom was doing online, which is the reason, Broken Record is the reason that I came forward. My perspective and the reason I thought I could be of any use at all to the committee in making their recommendations is because not only am I a musician and have been paid as such for 20 years, but I've been a music broadcaster for 14 years with the BBC. So I'm constantly supplied with new music, albeit in the area of the garden that Ed and Nadine and I represent, within alternative indie music, if you like. And I've seen artists come through, often, connect with their audience, become end-of-year chart favourites, or like Nadine, Mercury-nominated artists. You were robbed, by the way. And then I've seen them disappear. And the thing that happens when a musician stops producing music, when an artist stops making art, is there's no fanfare or press release. You just hear one of their songs 3 or 4 years down the line, you think, oh God, what happened to them? And so much of the new music that I play, I don't hear album 2, I don't hear album 3, and I know why it's happening. The other thing is the embarrassment of going home to the same people who looked at you sideways when you said you wanted to be a musician, the embarrassment of going back and admitting that financially you're failing, That's why there's only us three here today. And Ed and I are in an advantageous position because we've connected with our audience. We've found the people who afford us a living as musicians. Nadine is incredibly brave because she's one of the few people who's been one of the few people here that's been thwarted by all this, and her contemporaries are being thwarted by all of this. So I think as a result of these panels, what I hope happens is that an awful lot more musicians are honest about their incomes. I think however leaky the boat has got, young musicians still don't want to rock it. And they don't want to admit that they can't make ends meet. I mean, particularly in genres where how much money you've got is part of your lyrics. Nobody wants to admit that they haven't got any.
Yeah. Well, good. That point actually will bring me on to my final question, because, like you said, you, Guy, and Ed, you've been lucky, you've been fortunate, you've been able to connect with your fans and to make a career financially out of music. With coronavirus and fans not being able to come to gigs and artists not being able to tour and connect with their fans as easily as they would have been, what impact do you think this is having as well on the future talent of the industry, and then the impact of fans, and if there are changes to streaming services, how will this impact fans as well?
It's obviously going to have a huge impact, and we don't quite know the fallout. But it's the whole thing with COVID, and it's not just I'm actually not just Radiohead. I'm a solo artist as well that was going to tour this year, so I'm starting again, and there's a band, there's 5 of us. I pay 4 musicians, and there's a crew of 4 or 5, and their livelihoods are gone overnight. And my band, my musicians, don't have an income. They can't tour, and they're also session musicians, so they don't have. So they're, my bass player, my friend, is doing. He said, well, I'm going to have to take a year out, and this is a chance to do an MA or something. My crew people, most of them, and these are not roadies in exclamation. These are technicians. These are proper technicians and engineers, and most of them, in fact, most of them I know have become delivery drivers, Amazon drivers,
because they've been excluded as well from the support packages, haven't they? They're part of the freelance community. Yeah,
totally. And there's a massive, their family as well. Musicians, crew, we're all family. We have so many experiences together. So it's obviously huge. The answer to your question, it's massive. And I don't quite know the impact that it'll have on musicians. But of course, young musicians who rely on live income are going to really struggle. And it's interesting because, as Tom Gray said, we shouldn't be having this because live income has fallen away. But for so long, live income has been like the Band-Aid. It's just like, and I just want to add that thing is the inherent problem that we have as musicians is we so love doing what we do. So we I've done this, a great rehearsal, great recording, you go, I'm the luckiest bugger on the planet. I would do this for free. And that's precisely what has been taken advantage of over the years, starting with 40, 50, 60 years ago. And because the thing is, it's one thing listening to music, but when you play it and make it, it's like, it's like therapy. I had years of depression, and I kept my head above the water because I'm in this band with my brothers, and it just made me feel that every time I checked into rehearsal, so that's kind of, I've slightly digressed, obviously, but there has to be an understanding of like where we started and why we've been taken advantage of, is because we absolutely adore what we do.
I think it's very important to dispel that myth, which I hear being bandied about so often, how lucky you are to be a musician, because it's a very enjoyable process, and all the benefits that you reap because of it. We work hard. We work very, very hard. And we do provide a service to so many people, especially in this time as well. If we're going to relate back to the pandemic, I believe that music has been vitally important to so many people to connect us together. And we deserve to be paid fairly for what we make and we work hard. It's not all parties and fun and all the rest of it. God, don't I know I was born too late to not experience any of that. But it's not the case. We have to be able to pay our rent. These are the things we have to be paid fairly in order to make work.
Yeah, Guy, I'll bring you in quickly and then I'll finish.
Nadine pretty much covered there what I was going to say towards the end. We're not after Robert Plant's third limousine. You know, there was a period there when musicians were paid way too much. You know, what we're talking about here is allowing people to live as working artists, to provide something that we all need. You know, music's not just something that soundtracks bits of your day. It's an important social document like the rest of art. It either reflects or reacts or provides escape from where we are in history and time, and it documents what we are as a species in something other than construction or destruction. It's too important to not fund.
It is. It's a necessity. It's fuel for your soul, you know, just as much as water and air are. I would argue anyway, for me personally, music is definitely food for your soul. But thank you, Chair, no more from me.
Thank you, Alex.
So thanks for watching. The next video will be a continuation of this second session.